Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. Manchester City made light work of Manchester United thanks to their number 9. So how far can Haaland's goals take Guardiola's side this season? With us for this one, he was at the Etihad on Sundays, our football correspondent David Ornstein, and we've also got Crafton just to indulge on some Manchester United chat as well. David, we have to kick off with the emotional day at the Etihad. Ricky Hatton, famous boxer here in the UK and actually probably globally, big Manchester City fan. He passed away. Big shock for boxing fans, big shock for football fans. What was the atmosphere like in the stadium?
Yeah, the news filtered through to me just as I arrived at the Etihad at sort of lunchtime. I was there really early for some TV commitments. Immediately, it sort of filtered through everybody, from stewards to people working there in broadcasting, media, staff, anybody you bumped into, fans. There was a real somber atmosphere. It was raining too, which felt quite apt. It was just miserable, and there was shock and disbelief and such a sharp and poignant feeling, given it was somebody so close to City, so ingrained in the region, the area, the club itself. He would have been there on the day, has a box at the Etihad, really up there with the Gallaghers as the most famous Manchester City fans, certainly those that are kind of connected to and involved in the club. Immediately, on a selfish note, my mind cast back to interviews I'd done with him over the years at his boxing gym at Hyde. He was a lovely guy, so welcoming. Even before that, remembering his title fights, especially the Vegas days, which were some of the most iconic in my British sporting memories, and a figure who was sort of universally respected, loved by many that had met him, complicated, of course, and he spoke about that. It made for a difficult situation. Broadcasters you would have seen on Sky, for example, they would have planned all their coverage in advance, and then suddenly you sort of tear up scripts because this is so much more important than a football match. It sort of puts it all into perspective in so many different ways, and I thought I actually thought there was going to be silence just to reflect, but it was applause, and that was very emotive actually. And there was a sort of City PA announcer who was reading through something. I couldn't hear it because the applause was so loud, but he on the big screens was visibly moved, and then I think it sort of touched everybody to see the Manchester United fans applauding so resoundingly at City's ground, and for somebody who was so well connected with City, just showed that he was a sort of true Mancunian, and that transcends. And even into today in the region, everybody you speak to is sort of mentioning it as something that's more important than this match, and has struck people in a different way. It doesn't get away from the football, and everything's relative, but yeah, it was incredibly sad, somber, and a reminder of how precious life is.
And I guess the best tribute is Manchester City winning the derby against Manchester United. It's been quite a season for City so far, David. Winning that first match against Wolves emphatically, then losing the next two, going to the international break, getting the result here against Manchester United. Where does this victory leave Manchester City for the season ahead?
Well, it's been a disjointed start for both clubs, but City are a far superior side of far greater pedigree in recent history. And it's been a disappointing year for City, clunky, complicated. They've tried to usher in a new era, really, with their recruitment in both January and the summer. They've got a new sporting director at the club. We'll come on to speak about all of that later. The sort of overhaul of the playing personnel, the churn, as they call it, players in and out, is pretty extraordinary. Questions over Pep Guardiola and how long he's going to be continuing there. But whether it was the terrible Ricky Hatton news, whether it was the magnitude of the game, the sort of transfer window closing and the penny needing to drop for City, it did click to an extent, aided by a very poor Manchester United team and performance. And they really needed it before Napoli and Arsenal, and it was a reminder of the powers they possess in pretty much every department on the pitch, but also off of it, in terms of the recruitment, for example, of Gigi Donnarumma. And they were head and shoulders above Manchester United. There were moments early on where I thought United looked dangerous, as they often do when they play City. But City were never tested. City sort of soaked that up. They probed, and as soon as spaces emerged, they killed United. And so the match was pretty straightforward. The importance of it to City, and you could say United in a completely different way, pretty sizable. But it's still such early days that we can't read a huge amount into it as to what it means for the season ahead, really.
Yeah, what do you reckon, Adam? This iteration of City, are you convinced so far by what you're seeing?
No, I wouldn't say. I don't look at them as see a team that's going to win the league. You know, when I look at kind of the consistency of Liverpool, although Liverpool have not seen play well yet, but they just keep winning games.
The Burnley game was hit and go, man. Come on.
Right. And I think they're quite a way behind Arsenal. I mean, that might look really stupid by this time next week after they've played each other. The only thing you think, you know, when they go to Arsenal next week is it is just that Haaland factor that will always give them a chance, both in terms of a title race, in terms of any single game. But I don't see them. You know, Man United had a lot of possession yesterday, which you wouldn't really expect from, you know, when you go to the Etihad. I know we've sort of seen United sort of increasingly playing this way, but I just don't see City as having the same level of control over games. I don't get the sense that they really pin teams in the way that they maybe did a couple of years ago. Equally, that might not matter so much, you know, if you've got Haaland running in behind from the halfway line, and playing slightly differently. So it's definitely a different City, and it's not quite clear yet how good and consistent the City team can be. And even yesterday, you know, first 20 minutes, I thought United were probably just about better. But, you know, I think both these teams at the moment struggle when there's any kind of setback within a game. We saw that for City, you know, both against Spurs and against Brighton. I'd be really interested to see how City respond if they go 1-0 down against Napoli or Arsenal. Because yesterday it felt to me very much like almost first goal will win the game.
Let's talk about Manchester United while we're still here. Much has been made of Ruben Amorim's tactics. Come on, I have to get you on it. We have to touch it. You can't just ignore United with there. I mean, come on. What do you make of it? Because is it the system? Is it the team? I mean, how do you even describe what you saw yesterday?
Very similar, really, to what we've seen for much of the past year, which is, you know, some square pegs in round holes positionally. Trying to do something, I think, with Bruno Fernandes, which I think people are getting increasingly confused by, to be honest. You know, trying to turn him into this almost deeper lying midfielder when he clearly doesn't have the defensive positional awareness. You saw Phil Foden run off him for the first goal. You know, it's difficult. You know, people are now saying, "Oh, Benjamin Sesko's not doing very well." It was his first start, but you know, he seems to be having some of the same difficulties that Rasmus Højlund had, which is that it's really hard to be a centre forward in this system. You know, that so much of it relies on good deliveries from wide, but they don't produce any good deliveries from wide. How many moves yesterday ended in just Patrick Dorgu not quite getting a crossway? And that's a problem for them. They don't have quality in some of the key positions that are essential, really, for the system to work, whether that's centre midfield. The goalkeeper, I think, is still a problem. I thought he was slow off his line for the Haaland dink, and the wide positions. And then, you know, are you making the most of some of your most expensive players, whether that's Bruno, whether it's Ahmad? So, you know, it's lots and lots of questions. I think Amorim's subs within games tend to make United worse rather than better. I think far too often he's almost just like swapping out centre-backs, you know, sometimes at moments in games where you're like, why are you doing that? And then, okay, Harry Maguire wins a header at a corner or something, you're like, okay, I can see some sense. But it's it's hard, I think, at the moment to get behind, and there's no real momentum behind United at all. They can't win more than one game in a row. And it's, you look at the games they've got coming up: Chelsea, Brentford away, Liverpool at the start of October, and it does just start to feel like we know where this is heading, even if we're not quite there yet. It feels like one of these movies that we just do every year at the moment.
Groundhog Day, I think, comes to mind. But you know what, David? 14th in the league, and Manchester United inconsistency, to say the least, is probably a good word that describes them. But were you expecting to see a little bit more from Ruben Amorim's team, considering the recruitment that they made over the summer?
Yes and no. The loss of Cunha to injury was a significant factor, I think, because their performance levels had improved since he and Mbeumo have come into the team. A lot of their metrics have been up and moving in the right direction this season, despite results, and it could kind of manifested itself in the performance against Arsenal, less so in between, and certainly Grimsby was a mark against. But in terms of a number of different areas that I was shown before the match, they're kind of moving in the right direction from a display perspective. But of course, our eyes don't lie. And in terms of what we saw on the day, I mean, it's hard to expect a great deal more against such opposition. My mind goes back to that opening game at Old Trafford. I was there too, and sort of everybody lauding United's performance. But they lost, and against a team, in Arsenal that was torn apart afterwards by people. The reaction was remarkable of how terrible Arsenal were. Yet they came away from Old Trafford with 3 points. That for me felt like you absolutely, if you're going to be praised so much for your performance, you've got to nick at least a point. This is Manchester United. We're not talking about a sort of a newly promoted side or somebody that you expect to be battling against relegation. And that put massive pressure on them against Fulham. And I think what we have now started to see is in this is not good at all, but whether they go ahead or they go behind, they're feeling a huge amount of pressure on their shoulders, and they don't seem to either have the weapons or the ideas or the game model or the structure or the sort of character to respond to that as they need to. And so, the way they'd been playing at times with Cunha and Mbeumo, maybe I would have expected more, but Cunha wasn't there. Let's see if he comes back for the Chelsea game, which would be a huge boost for them. Losing again, Mount had shown flashes early on, especially against Arsenal, to another injury. Not bringing in a central midfielder in the window, which seems to be something Ruben Amorim had wanted. Of course, they had the well-documented pursuit of Carlos Baleba. Benjamin Sesko, who doesn't look quite ready yet. A player of immense potential and talent, and I'm sure he has a great future ahead of him. But he's 22 years old, fresh from RB Leipzig. Many felt he maybe should have stayed there longer to develop or taken a step like Newcastle United. Arsenal were looking at him, and they clearly veered towards Victor Gyökeres for more experience and somebody who could hit the ground running immediately. This young lad is coming in and needing to do that at Manchester United and all that comes with it. And he wasn't played early on, and now maybe you can sort of see why, but United don't really have any other option. So you expected more on the one hand, but on the other, with everything that's going on at United on and off the pitch, and the struggles they're experiencing, and the opposition, and the occasion, and the Ricky Hatton thing we mentioned earlier, it didn't massively shock me. I think what happens next is a far more important than what happened on Sunday.
Okay, well, let's talk about another number 9, the one wearing sky blue. Let's talk about Erling Haaland. Yeah, Haaland's double on Derby Day puts him on 90 goals in 101 Premier League games. And let me get this right, I think it's also 5 goals from his opening 4 Premier League games this season. David, I mean, look, we've been talking about Isak all summer. Should we be talking about Erling Haaland once again, especially anyone who's got in on their fantasy team?
Yeah, well, on both fronts, yes. In short, he's phenomenon, and we've seen enough of him now to know that. And yeah, he didn't have his best season last time round, which was impacted by injury. He was never going to get close to the heights of the previous season, and if he did, then we're talking about one of the greatest goal scorers ever, and that might, of course, still prove to be the case. In the interim period, he signed a new contract, so he's at City to stay. They're not stupid. They want him for as long as possible. And he's not perfect. He's going to be working on elements of his game to try and get even better. But when he's fit, basically, he is going to be more than a handful for any opposition, let alone one that is struggling. And so I think, scrutiny of an Erling Haaland is fine and fair, but criticism is probably, harsh criticism is probably a bit naive. And he's a force of nature that appears only to be getting better in terms of developing his game under Pep Guardiola. He could well be going to a World Cup now, because we haven't seen him so much at an international level on the biggest stages. And they're still learning about him at City in terms of the combinations, the playmakers. The firmest connection was with Kevin De Bruyne, who's not there anymore, and so that will have to be rebuilt with the likes of Reinders and sort of Foden, who's trying to come back to the top level, and your Doku's of this world. Doku looked fantastic yesterday. Savinho when he plays, so on. Jack Grealish isn't there now. They had a bit of a connection too. So the Premier League ought to be afraid the way Erling Haaland is now coming to the boil. But again, he'll face an entirely different proposition at the Emirates on Sunday, whether it's Saliba or Mosquera and Gabriel, sort of the best defence in the Premier League in recent times. And we've seen he can be kept quiet, but when he gets those opportunities, as we saw, if you give him space, he is thirsty for goals and he's lethal in front of goals. So good luck to those trying to stop him.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, but also, does City's success this season depend on him, Adam? You spoke about it at the top, but imagine if he's injured. Do you think there's enough firepower in this team to carry them forward?
He doesn't really get that many injuries, though, does he? He's like one of these players, like, we sometimes say, don't we, with Liverpool, like, what if Salah or Van Dijk get injured? These top players, they don't pick up the little niggles in quite the same way as we sometimes see, from inferior players or less fortunate players. Obviously, Van Dijk had that one really serious one, but that was, the collision. Haaland, I mean, we talk about, like, last season he wasn't as good. He still got 34 goals for Manchester City, right? Imagine if Manchester United had
take that any day. Yeah.
I mean, did all their players get 34 goals last season? It was only like 10. It was only like 10 or 12 more in the Premier League. So a bad season for Erling Haaland is a season that gets another forward a £100 million move. That is how good he is. He is, in my opinion, he's by far the best centre forward in the world. I think he's a better forward than Isaac. That's no criticism of Isaac. I just think Haaland's level is so far beyond what we see elsewhere in terms of that real, because there aren't that many sort of real number nines, and he's amazing. Even the way he took both goals yesterday. The kind of subtlety of the dink for the first one, the run off the shoulder of the defender, and then the kind of brutality of the third one, just the speed at which he runs, not just off the ball but with the ball. I mean, Maguire trying to get back with him. I know Maguire's not the fastest centre back in the world, but the pace at which Haaland was going with the ball and then the composure, you just never doubted that was going to be a goal. Probably should have had a hat trick. So yeah, I mean, there's no doubt, and I think it's really good. It is one of the advantages of this expanded World Cup that we're pretty guaranteed to see some of these massive superstar names in the World Cup next year, in a way that maybe previously we've not seen a Salah or a Haaland at certain World Cups because of the difficulties to qualify. So that is good next year, and it's going to be fascinating to see him in a less dominant team, in Norway, and see how far he can take them. It's a slightly different form of pressure. In terms of like the players around him, I thought the encouragement yesterday for City was how good Phil Foden was. Foden yesterday he was coming back into the team. He didn't look like a player that's kind of fallen out of the starting lineup with England and is struggling a bit. I mean, he looked like the best version of Phil Foden. So that's exciting for City. And I also thought it was the best game I've seen Doku play. The amount of
That
times
first
I've
goal
sort of
was
seen
lovely,
him. Yeah, like the amount of times I see him and you sort of, oh, that's exciting. And then you're tearing your hair out because the final product isn't quite what you want it to be. And I kind of wondered if that penny would ever drop. And if it does, that's, again, very scary, but also exciting for Belgium as well for the World Cup.
For sure. David, just thinking about the big test it is for Pep Guardiola to put all these players, all these pieces back together, really. Last season, obviously, underwhelming by their standards. There have been comparisons to the summer of 2017, but how much does this season differ in the fact that all their rivals also are doing insane business at the same time?
Yeah, I was talking to some people close to City, and they sort of explained there were many windows in which City could spend heavily, and their rivals wouldn't really match it, and even having done a lot of heavy investment under this ownership in the early days, they sort of were able to ease off, and they were still ahead of the opposition. Manchester United have spent very heavily, Chelsea more recently, and Arsenal too. But there was a time that they were sort of kind of on their own, and that's not the case anymore. You've got a sort of arms race in the transfer market. United still going incredibly big. Arsenal, massive expenditure. Liverpool too, and we don't need to go into net spends and things on this show because it upsets people. But they're not having it all their own way. I'll give you an example of Florian Wirtz. They would have normally had, I think, a clearish path to somebody like him, and Liverpool trumped them and managed to get that signing in, and so. We seem to be in a different era here. It's also, we've not seen City invest like they have in 2025 for a long time, if ever. There was a January splurge. There's been a summer splurge as well. In many ways, they're unrecognisable from what they were just sort of a year ago. It's a really fascinating moment in this sort of journey, with Cheeky Begiristain stepping away and being replaced by Hugo Viana, and obviously the window run largely by him and with Pep Guardiola. Some feel the real test of Viana will come once he's able to appoint a head coach rather than inheriting one, and that's one for the future. But if anybody can knit this together to be competitive, it's Guardiola and City. And so there's, when you look through their team now, I mean, and you think, when players are fit and available, there's not a great deal of weakness. There's a huge amount of strength. There are holes you could pick in terms of, I don't know, recognised right back, for example. You've touched upon the attacking support to Erling Haaland, if, God forbid for them, he suffers an injury, and what they would do in that case. How are they going to fare without Gundogan, who's been quite integral to their build-up and their whole team over two spells? Rodri, how will he fare sort of fully back from ACL? And he didn't have his best game yesterday, lost a lot of possession. Will John Stones recapture fitness, or are they going to be going with what they have in that central defensive area? But when a team can turn around and bring in one of the very best goalkeepers on the planet, on top of what was already a new first choice goalkeeper just a couple of months previously, then it's pretty scary, the potential.
I can't help but think, I mean, how does he do it again, Adam, personally? David might think otherwise, but it's a lot to go back to those heights with a different iteration of a team, but also there's a lot of people in the background who are also changing as well. I mean, he's either got unbelievable stamina, or maybe this is just a 2-3 year thing.
Yeah, I'd be really surprised if he's here more than 18 months from now. I'd be quite surprised if he's here a year from now. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he was to leave at the end of this season. I do wonder a little bit whether it's that thing of if he just starts thinking, I just want one more league title, and that just keeps him here for longer, because you keep thinking, oh, get it next year, get it next year. But I'd be really surprised if he extends again. In terms of, where the team is now, people actually forget City ended last season pretty well. Something like, I think, 12 wins in their last 16. Obviously, they lost the FA Cup final and went out of the Club World Cup in slightly farcical fashion. But actually, the form towards the end of the season did calm down a lot. I think one of the big tests is actually going to be over the next couple of months, because that's where it fell apart last season. This increased number of Champions League games, Carabao Cup games, and it started picking up injuries, and it kind of unbalanced itself. And I think that will be a test for them. I still, I go back to what I said at the start, which is that Pep Guardiola wants teams that have a huge amount of control over games, and at the moment, they seem to give up too much possession, probably for his own liking. And I think they're also very, very vulnerable within games if things don't go exactly to plan. So, we saw yesterday they got the first goal and then they could kick on from there. But against Brighton, everything looked to be completely okay. Then all of a sudden there's a freak incident and it's 1-1 and they kind of fall apart. Against Tottenham, a team came with a plan that really disrupted them and they couldn't really cope with that. And I'd be quite surprised if they were to go to Arsenal next week and win. And if they don't, and Liverpool win their game, then you're already looking at it and thinking, well, what's that? Potentially 9 points gap by the third week of September. That's pretty big to try and overcome. So I think they've already, in this world where, we are looking, I think, probably at teams that are going to hit 90 points to win a title. Like, it's already, not much margin for error left. So I think next week's massive, actually, for both teams, because Arsenal as well can't afford, they can't afford to have lost 2 of their first 5 games, with this, what we think might be a finished product squad at last, right? This is their
again.
Let's not turn it into an Arsenal podcast, but
please,
even as a non-Arsenal fan, I'm watching and thinking, surely now, you guys are ready to do it. So, I would expect Arsenal to win that game, but we'll see.
Okay, now before we wrap up, I need to move on very quickly as we're running out of time. Ahead of today's show, David, we asked some of the viewers, listeners, questions via YouTube, and we've got a couple to quickly rattle through if you don't mind. First one says Manchester City allegedly said that they didn't go for a right back in the summer because there was no suitable option on the market. Are they monitoring anyone for next year in that position, and what does the future hold then for someone like Matheus Nunes?
Yeah, I think it was well documented that they looked at that position, and it was Tino Livramento, I think, that was high on their agenda, a player they, and I'm sure pretty much every other club at this level really likes, and appears to be flying and have a great future for club and country. Be really fascinating to see how he figures for Thomas Tuchel at the World Cup next summer. But Newcastle had no intention of selling him, and I don't know if it even developed because of that. But I guess it's one to watch for the future because the admiration is there. They will have had other options too, no doubt. But nothing has materialised. Nunes is clearly playing out of position and is not the ideal scenario there. And they've tried different options. Akanji's played there previously. Of course, Kyle Walker's not there anymore. Rico Lewis has played there when he's been available at times. They seem to have whether it's a preference or just a necessity to playing centre-backs at full-back. They've not done too badly, but of course that is an area where you could see City looking. Was it Cambiasso of Juventus? I'm not sure if he was more left-back or right-back, but that's a player that Pep Guardiola has liked previously, and they looked into signing from Juve, but it didn't materialise. So, perhaps one for the subsequent markets.
Okay, you like this next one. This person says, David, you're an excellent journalist who has come to be known for his work during the transfer window. What does your work look like outside the transfer window?
lying down in a cold, dark room for a long period of time. Well, there's loads that we can be getting on with pods like this, and things that we can't or don't have time for so much in the window. So other projects, interviews, contributing to all the features we do on The Athletic, and got lots of broadcasting commitments around the games. There's always stories developing from managerial, executive changes, new contracts, injuries, international news, ownership situations that we've seen in previous years that often tend to happen in this period, or in the period between the January and summer windows. There's also lots of transfer activity that starts to brew as you get towards the windows. Conversations are taking place, meetings, people are drawing up, clubs are formulating their targets lists. And somebody in my position, you're also able to do lots more meetings and calls and conversations around topics like this and wider journalism, because you've got a bit more time on your hands, whereas during the windows, many of your contacts aren't able to meet, and vice versa. You aren't, because we're all so busy. So you snatch a phone call or a text message where possible. And this is a really good opportunity to make up for lost time in that sense. And those moments are absolutely crucial for delivering when you get to the window. It's arguably a more important time now to lay the groundwork. Try and live a bit of social life and restore a bit of sanity to yourself after those sort of crazy months.
Yeah, much respect indeed. All right, Adam, before we go, as ever, it's Monday. It's time for final whistle. You're going to be beating the whistle, but remember, you have a minute to explain what's caught your eye this week in the world of football. Got my phone ready? Go on, Adam. 1 minute starts now.
I'm worried I won't need 1 minute for this, so I'm going to do a bit of a preamble. Just sort of going.
Phil for me, yeah.
Phil for me. No, the team I'm worried for is Leeds United, who spent maybe just over 100 million euros this summer. But they've managed to sort of build a really good defence and really good midfield and forgotten to buy an attack. They've not scored a goal from open play. The money they have spent on their forward line, 2 free transfers, Calvert-Lewin and Emecha, who scored the penalty against Everton, Noah Okafor from the wing, we're yet to really see much of, but they look really short from a creative point of view, and I'm not sure they've given themselves a chance actually to make the chances that they need to win games. They're going to be really competitive in lots of games, but they're not going to be able to turn those into 3 points. That's what we've seen so far, and it's very strange to me because those owners want to be a stable Premier League team.
Mate, that was literally 1 minute on the clock. Oi, broadcaster extraordinaire. You didn't. I mean, you didn't even need it, though. Really. There was substance.
The first 10 seconds.
Yeah, there was substance. There was poise. You got straight to the point. All right, gents, let's leave it there. David, Adam, thank you so much for your time, and also thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like the video and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and don't forget to also leave us a comment as well. Right, we're back soon. For more from the Athletic FC podcast, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. We've got top journalists like David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the entire season. Make sure you don't miss an episode of the Athletic FC. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts from.